You're not ready for what happened after they humiliated her in front of everyone. It was supposed to be the most glamorous engagement party the city had ever seen. Chandeliers glowed like stars. Champagne glasses clinked softly. Every guest was dressed in silk and diamonds. But hidden near the back, half asleep on a velvet chair, sat a quiet 3-year-old girl nobody had invited. She wasn't a guest. She was only the maid's daughter. Nobody noticed her until the little girl walked straight up to the billionaire, tugged gently on his sleeve, and whispered 4 quiet words that made his fiancée's face turn white as snow. "Check the painting, sir." The music never stopped playing. The laughter never stopped echoing. But something in that room shifted forever, because hidden behind that painting was a secret about to destroy one woman's lie and save a man from the biggest mistake of his life. Hey, beautiful souls, before we dive into tonight's story, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I genuinely love seeing how far these stories travel. If this is your first time here, welcome. We tell real, emotional, life-changing stories every single week. And if that sounds like your kind of thing, hit that subscribe button so you never miss one. Now stay with me until the very end, because the final twist in this story is one you will not see coming. I promise you that. Let's begin. Nobody in that ballroom knew a 3-year-old girl was about to become the most important person in the room. The Voss estate looked like something out of a fairy tale that night. Hundreds of candles flickered along the marble staircase. Crystal chandeliers threw soft golden light across a sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Outside, a line of black town cars stretched down the long driveway, dropping off some of the wealthiest people in the city. Tonight wasn't just another party. Tonight was Callum Voss's engagement celebration. At 34, Callum was one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. Having built Voss Industries from a small tech startup into a global empire, he was the kind of man magazines loved to write about. Sharp suits, sharper instincts, and a reputation for being impossible to fool in business. And yet, in matters of the heart, he had let his guard down completely. Standing beside him, radiant in a champagne-colored gown, was Sienna Langford, 30 years old, effortlessly elegant, and adored by every camera in the room. She laughed at exactly the right moments. She touched Callum's arm at exactly the right times. To everyone watching, they looked like the perfect couple. "To the future Mrs. Voss," someone called out, raising a glass. The room erupted in applause. Sienna smiled the kind of smile that belonged on a magazine cover. Callum smiled too, though if anyone had looked closely enough, they might have noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes. Far from the chandeliers and the champagne, in a small staff room tucked behind the kitchen, a little girl sat curled up on a folded blanket, her small shoes kicked off beside her. Her name was Isla. She was 3 years old, with dark curly hair and a stuffed rabbit she refused to put down. Her mother, Elena Vargas, had worked for the Voss family for almost 6 years, first as a part-time housekeeper and eventually as the head of staff, trusted with nearly every corner of the estate. Elena hadn't planned on bringing Isla tonight, but her babysitter had canceled at the last minute. And, with an event this important, there had been no time to find anyone else. "You stay right here, mi amor," Elena whispered, kneeling beside her daughter. "Don't wander off. Promise me." Isla nodded sleepily, hugging her rabbit tighter. "Promise." Elena kissed her forehead and hurried back into the chaos of trays, flowers, and last-minute instructions. She loved her daughter more than anything in this world, and she hated leaving her alone, even for a moment. But bills didn't pay themselves, and a job like this, steady, respectful, with a fair wage, wasn't easy to find as a single mother. What Elena didn't know yet was that her daughter wouldn't stay in that staff room for long, because down the hall, past the kitchen, past the staff-only door, was the long gallery corridor, the one place in the entire mansion Callum rarely let anyone enter without permission. It was where he kept his mother's painting. Eleanor Voss had passed away when Callum was 19, taken too soon by an illness that no money in the world could cure. She had been a quiet, gentle woman, nothing like the high society wives Callum now found himself surrounded by. She used to paint in the early mornings, humming softly to herself long before Callum's father built his fortune. The portrait hanging in that gallery was the last thing she ever painted, a portrait of Callum himself at 12 years old, sitting by a window with sunlight on his face. She had finished it only weeks before she died. Callum visited that painting almost every single day. It was the only place in his life that still felt completely honest. Tonight, with 300 guests filling his home, he hadn't visited it once. He didn't know that just a few rooms away, his fiancée had visited it twice already, and not for the reason anyone would expect. Back in the staff room, Isla's eyes fluttered open. The music from the ballroom drifted faintly down the hallway, and somewhere beyond the noise, she heard something else. A door closing softly, quiet voices, curiosity, the kind only a 3-year-old possesses without fear, made her slide off the blanket, rabbit in hand, and pad barefoot toward the sound. She had no idea what she was about to see, and she had no idea that before the night ended, she would be the only person brave enough to say something nobody else dared to say. What Isla saw in that hallway would have meant nothing to most adults, but for her mother, it would mean everything. The gallery corridor was dim, lit only by small wall sconces that cast long shadows across the framed paintings. Isla pressed herself against the wall near the entrance, peeking around the corner with wide eyes. She saw Sienna first. The bride-to-be wasn't wearing her bright party smile anymore. Her arms were crossed, her voice low and sharp as she spoke to a man Isla didn't recognize. He was tall, dressed all in black, holding a flat leather case under one arm. "It needs to happen tonight," Sienna hissed, "before the wedding, before anyone starts asking questions about insurance valuations." "It's risky," the man muttered, "doing it with 300 guests in the house." "It's the only night no one will notice," Sienna snapped. "Everyone's too busy getting drunk and complimenting my dress." Isla didn't understand the words. She was 3. But she understood tone, the way children always do, and this tone made her tiny hands grip her rabbit tighter. The man knelt in front of the large painting at the end of the hall, the one of a boy sitting by a window, sunlight on his face. Isla had seen that painting before. Her mother always paused in front of it while dusting, sometimes touching the frame gently, like it was something precious. The man lifted it off the wall. Isla's eyes widened. Behind it, she caught a flash of something different. Not the boy by the window anymore, but another picture entirely, dull and strange, like the colors had been wiped away. Then, just as quickly, the man hung something back onto the wall. From where Isla stood, it looked almost the same as before. Almost. But there was one thing missing that Isla noticed immediately, because she had stared at that painting 100 times while her mother worked. The small yellow butterfly that used to sit on the edge of the windowsill in the painting, the one Isla always pointed at and called the pretty bug, was gone. "Hurry," Sienna whispered. "Someone's coming." Isla barely had time to duck behind a tall curtain before footsteps echoed past her. She held her breath the way her mother taught her during hide and seek, her small heart pounding. When the footsteps faded, she crept back out and stared at the painting one more time. The boy was still there. The window was still there, but the butterfly was gone. "Isla," her mother's voice, sharp with worry, echoed down the hallway. Elena came rushing around the corner, scooping her daughter up immediately, checking her over with frantic hands. "I told you to stay in the room. Do you know how scared I was?" "Mama, the picture," Isla said, pointing toward the painting. "The bug is gone." Elena glanced at the painting, her tired eyes barely registering it. To her, just from a long shift, it looked exactly the same as it always had. "It's just a painting, baby. Come on, we need to go back before someone sees us here." "But Mama..." "Isla, please, not tonight." Elena carried her daughter back toward the staff room, her mind racing through the dozen tasks still on her list. She had no idea that her daughter had just witnessed something that would unravel an entire engagement. She had no idea that in less than an hour, her own job, the one thing standing between her family and homelessness, would hang by a thread because of what her daughter saw. And neither of them knew that somewhere in that ballroom, Callum Voss was about to raise a toast to the woman he thought he knew completely, a woman who, only minutes earlier, had ordered the theft of his mother's final gift to him. Back in the staff room, Elena settled Isla onto the blanket again, smoothing her daughter's curls with a tired hand. She tried to focus on the long list of tasks still waiting for her. The dessert table needed restocking. The valet staff needed direction, and Mr. Voss's assistant had asked twice already about the seating arrangement for the toast. But something about Isla's face kept tugging at her attention. Her daughter wasn't pouting the way she normally did when scolded. She looked unsettled. Her small fingers kept twisting the rabbit's ear, a habit she only had when something genuinely worried her. Hey, Elena said softly, crouching down again. What's wrong, mi amor? The man took the bug picture, Isla mumbled. He put a different one. Elena sighed gently, brushing it off as a sleepy toddler's imagination running wild after a long, overstimulating night. Children invented stories all the time, strange men, missing bugs, secret pictures. It was almost endearing. I'm sure it's still there, baby. We'll look tomorrow, okay? Right now, Mama has to work. Isla didn't argue, but she didn't forget either. She simply waited. And 3-year-olds, as it turns out, can be remarkably patient when something feels important enough. 4 words from a sleepy toddler were about to do what no business rival, no reporter, and no jealous ex had ever managed to do: make Sienna Langford lose her composure in public. As the evening progressed, the toast began. Callum stood at the center of the ballroom, glass raised, Sienna beside him glowing under the chandelier light. Guests gathered close, phones lifted to capture the moment. Months ago, Callum began, I didn't think I had room in my life for anything other than work. Then I met someone who reminded me there was more to want. The crowd let out warm, approving murmurs. Sienna squeezed his hand, her smile flawless. Nobody noticed the small figure slipping through the gaps of expensive shoes and flowing gowns near the edge of the room. Isla had wandered out of the staff room again, quietly the way only a determined toddler can, drawn by the sound of music and lights she wasn't allowed to see. She spotted Callum standing tall near the front, the man whose painting the stranger had touched earlier. In her small mind, there was only one thing that mattered right now. She had to tell him about the bug, weaving between legs and skirts with a fearless confidence only small children possess. Isla made her way toward the front of the room. A few guests glanced down, smiling at the unexpected sight of a toddler in pajama print leggings wandering through a black tie event. Nobody stopped her. Nobody thought to. And so, Callum continued, raising his glass higher, I'd like to ask all of you to join me in toasting. A small hand tugged at his sleeve. Callum looked down, momentarily thrown off. A little girl stood there clutching a stuffed rabbit, staring up at him with wide-serious eyes. The room buzzed with confused whispers. Someone near the back laughed softly. A waiter began moving forward to usher the child away. Callum held up a hand, stopping him. Something about the seriousness in those small eyes made him pause. He crouched down slightly. Hey there, are you lost, sweetheart? Isla shook her head, glancing briefly toward Sienna before looking back at Callum. Check the paintings, sir, she whispered. The words were soft, barely audible over the music, but they landed like a thunderclap for the one person standing close enough to hear them clearly. Sienna's smile froze. For just a fraction of a second, so brief most guests wouldn't even register it, the color drained from her face. Her grip on her champagne glass tightened. Sweetie, Sienna said quickly, forcing a laugh, I think you've had a long night. Let's find your mommy, okay? She reached for Isla's hand, but Callum's eyes had already shifted toward her. He hadn't missed the reaction. Years of reading boardrooms, contracts, and liars across negotiating tables had trained him to notice exactly what most people overlooked. And what he had just seen on his fiancée's face wasn't confusion, it was fear. Which painting? Callum asked the little girl gently, ignoring the rising murmur of the crowd around him. Before Isla could answer, Elena came rushing through the crowd, mortified, scooping her daughter into her arms. I am so sorry, Mr. Voss. She must have wandered off. It's all right, Elena, Callum said, his voice calm but distant, his mind clearly somewhere else entirely. Truly, it's all right. He looked at Isla one more time. Which painting, sweetheart? Isla, safely cradled against her mother's shoulder now, pointed a small finger toward the hallway leading to the gallery. The boy one, she said simply. The bug is gone. Sienna let out a strained laugh, louder this time. Callum, please, she's 3. She probably means a stuffed animal or something from the nursery decorations. Let's get back to the toast. Everyone is waiting. One moment, Callum said. The warmth had left his voice entirely now. He set his champagne glass down on a nearby table, ignoring the 300 confused guests, the photographers waiting for his next smile, the caterers frozen mid-step. He walked toward the gallery hallway. Sienna called after him, her voice climbing an octave higher than usual. Callum, it's our engagement party. People are staring. He didn't stop walking because some part of him, the same instinct that had built an empire by trusting his gut over flattering words, already knew something was very wrong. And the only person in that entire mansion who had told him the truth tonight was a 3-year-old girl nobody had bothered to invite. The gallery was quiet when he reached it, the music from the ballroom now just a muffled hum behind heavy doors. Callum walked slowly down the corridor, past portraits of his grandfather, past landscapes his father had bought purely as investments, until he reached the one painting that had never been about money at all. His mother's portrait of him at 12 years old, sitting by a window, sunlight on his face. At first glance, nothing seemed wrong. The colors were warm and familiar. The boy in the painting still wore that same quiet half smile his mother had captured so perfectly. Callum exhaled, almost relieved, wondering if Sienna had been right after all, that this was simply the overtired imagination of a toddler. Then his eyes drifted to the windowsill in the painting. He stood there a long moment, frowning, certain something had changed but unable to place exactly what. He had looked at this painting nearly every day for years. He knew every brushstroke the way some men know their own reflection. Something was missing. He just didn't know what yet. Footsteps echoed behind him. He turned to find Sienna standing in the hallway entrance, her arms crossed, her expression carefully arranged into something resembling patience. Callum, she said quietly, can we please talk about this somewhere other than in front of your mother's painting? It wasn't what she said. It was the way she said it. Too careful, too rehearsed. For the first time that night, Callum didn't answer right away. What Callum found behind that frame would turn his engagement party into the most humiliating night of Sienna's life and almost cost an innocent woman everything. Talk about what exactly? Callum finally asked, his voice low and even. Sienna stepped closer, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. You're letting a toddler's bedtime ramblings ruin our night. People are already gossiping out there. Is this really how you want tonight to end? You went pale, Callum said simply. The second she said those words, I watched it happen. I was startled. A strange child grabbed your arm in the middle of our toast, Callum. Forgive me for reacting like a normal human being. It was a reasonable explanation, smooth, logical, the kind of answer that would have satisfied him on any other night. Except Callum's eyes drifted back to the painting, to that windowsill that felt wrong in a way he still couldn't name. And something inside him refused to let it go. Get Harlan on the phone, he said. Who? My family's art curator. He cataloged every piece in this house after my mother passed. He'll know in moments if anything's different. Sienna's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This late at night? Callum, this is absurd. Then it'll be a quick, absurd phone call. A short while later, with the party still murmuring through champagne and rumors in the ballroom, Harlan arrived, an older man in glasses who had spent decades around the Voss family's collection. He studied the painting for less than a minute before his expression shifted. This isn't the original brushwork, he said quietly. The room went silent. What do you mean it's not the original? Callum asked, his voice suddenly sharp. The canvas texture is different. The aging on this varnish is inconsistent with a piece of this age. It's been artificially distressed to look older than it is, and here, he pointed near the windowsill, there's a faint outline where something was painted over, a small object, possibly removed during the copying process. The butterfly. Callum felt something cold settle in his chest. This is a forgery, Harlan confirmed. A very good one, but a forgery. Sienna let out a bristle laugh. That's ridiculous. Why would anyone? Because your mother's piece, Harlan said, turning toward Callum and ignoring Sienna completely now, wasn't just sentimental. Eleanor Voss painted under a private alias for nearly a decade before she passed. Collectors who know undervalued contemporary works have been quietly searching for pieces under that name for years. This painting, if authenticated, could be worth several $1 million on the right market. Callum's mind raced backward through every conversation he'd had with Sienna about his mother, every gentle question she'd asked about the gallery, about which pieces meant the most to him, which ones he visited most often. She hadn't been getting to know him. She had been mapping his vulnerabilities. "Where is the real painting?" Callum asked. His voice was dangerously quiet now. "I have no idea what either of you are talking about," Sienna snapped, panic finally cracking through her composure. "This is insane. You're going to ruin our engagement over the word of a toddler and some old man's guesswork." "Harlan has authenticated half the museums in this state," Callum said. "He doesn't guess." Desperate now, Sienna's eyes darted toward the hallway, searching for an exit from a conversation she was clearly losing. Then, in a move that would later make Callum's stomach turn with disgust, she pivoted entirely. "Maybe you should be asking your precious staff," she said coldly. "Who has access to every room in this house at all hours? Who was conveniently in this exact hallway tonight with her daughter, of all the rooms in a 300-guest mansion?" The implication hit the room like a slap. Elena, who had been standing quietly near the entrance with Isla still in her arms, felt her blood run cold. "I would never," she started, her voice breaking. "Mr. Voss, I have worked for your family for 6 years. I would never touch anything in this house that wasn't mine to touch." "She's just trying to protect her job," Sienna said smoothly, recovering her composure now that the spotlight had shifted away from her. "It's understandable, but someone clearly orchestrated this, Callum, and I think we both know domestic staff have access. Most guests simply don't." Lena's arms tightened protectively around Isla, who had gone very still, sensing the tension even if she couldn't understand the words. For one terrible moment, Callum said nothing, and in that silence, Elena felt 6 years of trust, of loyalty, of quietly building a life for her daughter in this house, hanging by the thinnest possible thread. She looked at Callum, searching his face for some sign of the man who had once given her an extra week of paid leave when Isla was born, who had personally made sure her wages never came late even during slow months. She needed him to remember that. Callum opened his mouth to respond, and then stopped, because something Isla had said, so small he'd almost missed it in the chaos, suddenly replayed in his mind with startling clarity. "The bug is gone." A toddler wouldn't invent a detail that specific. She wouldn't know to mention a missing object on a windowsill. She likely couldn't even reach to see clearly without being lifted, unless she had actually seen the real painting recently, closely enough to notice something so small, which meant she hadn't imagined anything at all. She had witnessed it happen. The security footage Callum was about to watch would end his engagement in less than 90 seconds. "Elena didn't do this," Callum said finally. The words landed quietly, but with absolute certainty. Sienna blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. "Callum, be reasonable. You don't actually know that." "I do, actually." He turned to one of the security staff hovering near the hallway entrance. "Pull the footage from this corridor, tonight, earlier in the evening." "You can't be serious," Sienna said, her voice climbing again. "You're going to humiliate me by reviewing security tapes at my own engagement party?" "If you're right and someone on my staff did this," Callum said evenly, "then the footage will prove it in minutes. If you're wrong, it'll prove that too." Something flickered across Sienna's face, the same flicker Callum had seen the moment Isla whispered those 4 words to him. Fear, quickly buried under indignation. "Fine," she snapped. "Review whatever you want." It took the security technician only a short time to pull the footage onto a tablet. Callum, Harlan, and a visibly shaking Sienna gathered in the small security office just off the kitchen, while Elena waited anxiously down the hall with Isla, who had finally fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder, exhausted from a night far too big for a 3-year-old. The footage began. A man in black carrying a flat leather case walked into the gallery hallway. Moments later, Sienna appeared, glancing over her shoulder before joining him. The timestamp ticked forward as the two of them lifted the painting off the wall together, Sienna holding it steady while the man swiftly hung a replacement in its place. The entire exchange took only a few minutes. Harlan exhaled slowly. "There's your proof." Sienna said nothing. There was nothing left to say. "Who is he?" Callum asked, his voice dangerously calm now, the kind of calm that came right before things truly fell apart. When Sienna still didn't answer, Harlan, who had spent decades in the art world and recognized far more faces than most people realized, leaned forward and tapped the screen. "That's Victor Crow," he said. "Private art broker. Mostly handles, let's say, less than legitimate sales for clients who need things to disappear quietly." Callum's jaw tightened. "And how exactly do you know an underground art broker, Sienna?" The silence stretched long enough that it answered the question on its own. "You were going to marry me soon," Callum said, his voice finally breaking from its calm composure, raw disbelief bleeding through. "Soon, Sienna, and you were stealing from me before the ring even left the box." "It's not what you think," Sienna said, tears forming now, though Callum could no longer tell if they were genuine or simply another performance. "I owed money, a lot of money. Victor was going to expose debts that would have destroyed my reputation before the wedding even happened. The painting was just sitting there, Callum. You barely even—" "Don't," Callum said sharply. "Don't tell me how often I visited my mother's painting." He sat back, exhaling slowly, the weight of the entire night finally settling over him. "I need you to leave my house," he said quietly. "Tonight. And I need the original painting returned within a day. Or I will personally make sure every gallery, every collector, and every news outlet in this country knows exactly what you tried to do." Sienna opened her mouth to argue, looked at the security footage still frozen on the screen, and apparently realized there was nothing left worth arguing for. She left without another word, her engagement, her reputation, and her champagne-colored dress disappearing down the same hallway where hours earlier she had smiled for cameras as the future Mrs. Voss. Callum sat alone in the small security office for a long moment, staring at the frozen image of his fiancée holding his mother's stolen portrait. Then he stood, walked down the hallway, and found Elena still waiting nervously near the staff room, Isla asleep against her shoulder. "I owe you an apology," Callum said quietly, "and your job was never in question, not for 1 second." Elena's eyes filled with relieved tears. "Thank you, Mr. Voss." Callum looked down at the sleeping toddler, her small face peaceful, completely unaware of the chaos she had just unraveled with 4 whispered words. "No," he said softly. "Thank you, to her, actually." What he didn't know yet, what none of them knew yet, was that the real painting, once recovered, was about to reveal something far more important than a forgery, something his mother had hidden there on purpose years before she died, waiting for exactly the right person to find it. What Callum found hidden inside his mother's painting would change not just his life, but the entire future of a family who had never asked for anything at all. True to his word, Victor returned the original painting the following day, delivered quietly by a lawyer who clearly wanted no further involvement in whatever scandal was unfolding. There would be no charges filed publicly. Callum wanted no part of dragging his mother's name through tabloids, but Victor's reputation in the art world would not survive the quiet phone calls Callum made that week. Sienna disappeared from the city's social circuit entirely within days. Some said she moved abroad. Others said her family cut her off the moment the story reached them privately. Callum never asked and never cared to know. What mattered to him was standing in his gallery hallway late one evening, finally face to face with his mother's real portrait again. The boy by the window, the sunlight on his face, and there on the windowsill, painted in careful, delicate strokes, the small yellow butterfly Isla had noticed missing. Callum smiled for the first time in days, running his fingers gently along the edge of the frame. That was when he felt it, a slight unevenness along the back panel, where canvas met the wooden frame. Something Harlan had mentioned earlier that week, almost in passing, that Eleanor Voss had occasionally built small hidden compartments into the backs of her larger frames, a quirk she'd picked up early in her painting years. Callum carefully turned the painting over. With trembling hands, he found the seam, pressed gently, and a thin wooden panel popped loose, revealing a small, folded envelope tucked inside, yellowed slightly with age but otherwise perfectly preserved. His mother's handwriting covered the front, "To whoever still believes in kindness when no one is watching." Callum's breath caught in his throat. He sat down right there on the gallery floor, the way he used to as a boy, and opened the letter with shaking fingers. "My dearest Callum, if you are reading this, it means you finally took the time to really look at this painting, not just glance at it on your way somewhere more important. I always hoped you would. I don't know what kind of man you'll have become by the time you find this. I worry sometimes that the world you're inheriting will teach you to trust money before people, polish before honesty. So I want to tell you something important while I still can. Years ago, before your father's company became what it is now, when we had far less than we do today, a young woman helped me through one of the hardest winters of my life. I was sick, frightened, and completely alone most days while your father traveled for work. She wasn't family, she wasn't paid to care. She simply did, because that's who she was. I never forgot her kindness, even after we lost touch. I always hoped that somehow life would bring someone like her back into our family's path, not out of fate or magic, but simply because good people tend to find their way toward each other eventually, if you pay attention. If you ever find someone who shows you real kindness, real honesty, without expecting anything in return, protect that person, Callum. Hold on to them. That kind of character is rarer than anything hanging on these walls. I love you more than any painting could ever show." Callum sat in stunned silence for a long moment, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. Then, almost as an afterthought, his eyes drifted to the bottom of the envelope, where a small, faded photograph had been tucked alongside the letter. A young woman, maybe 20 years old, smiling beside a hospital bed. Callum's chest tightened. It was unmistakably, undeniably, a much younger Elena. The following morning, Callum found her in the kitchen preparing breakfast for the staff before her shift officially began. He placed the old photograph gently on the counter in front of her. Elena's hands stilled completely. She stared at the image for a long moment before her eyes filled with tears. "I haven't seen this in many years," she whispered. "I used to volunteer at the hospital before Isla was born. There was a woman there, so kind, always asking about my day, even though she was the one who was sick. I never even learned her last name. She passed before I could visit again. Her name was Eleanor," Callum said quietly. "She was my mother." Elena's hand flew to her mouth, the photograph blurring through sudden tears. "She wrote about you," Callum continued, his voice thick with emotion, "in a letter she hid inside her own painting, years before either of us had any idea our lives would cross again." Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and Elena's quiet, disbelieving tears. "I'm setting up a trust," Callum said finally, "for Isla's education, and I want to move you and her into the guest house on the property, fully renovated, completely yours, no rent for as long as you want it." "Mr. Voss, I can't possibly." "You already gave my family something money could never buy," Callum said gently. "Twice now, actually. Once to a sick woman who never forgot it, and once to her son through your daughter when nobody else in that entire room had the courage to tell me the truth." Later that evening, Callum found Isla sitting on the gallery floor, staring up at the restored painting, her small fingers pointing proudly at the tiny yellow butterfly on the windowsill. "The bug came back," she announced happily. Callum crouched down beside her, smiling for what felt like the first time in years, without anything forced about it. "Yeah," he said softly, "it did, thanks to you." Isla simply shrugged, already losing interest, more focused on her stuffed rabbit than the billionaire kneeling beside her. "I just wanted to help, sir," she said simply, before wandering off toward her mother's voice in the next room. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive through lawyers, investigators, or carefully worded confrontations. Sometimes it arrives in four quiet words from someone too young to understand status, wealth, or the difference between a maid's daughter and a billionaire's fiancée. Isla never understood why everyone made such a big deal about a missing painted bug. She only knew that something had felt wrong, and she had said so. And sometimes that's all the world really needs. Someone honest enough to speak up when everyone else chooses comfortable silence instead. This story is a reminder that titles, wealth, and polished appearances will never tell you who someone truly is. A maid's daughter, dismissed as nothing more than a tired toddler wandering through a party she wasn't invited to, ended up saving a man from a lifetime of betrayal simply because she told the truth when it would have been so much easier to stay quiet. Kindness has a way of finding its way back to us, sometimes decades later, in the most unexpected form imaginable. If this story moved you even a little, let us know in the comments. We genuinely read every single one. Hit like if you believe honesty matters more than status. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. And stay close because next week's story might just be the one that breaks your heart in the best possible way. We'll see you in the next one.